topic is the impact of the military on our ethics in a pluralistic societies. In the beginning, I will recall some historical facts from various stages, both of military service and peacekeeping, which we in our book assume as general knowledge and background. Then I will outline reflections on the three parts of the book, focusing on three theses. Firstly, I discuss changes in military and peace ethics in the so-called complementary peace ethics since the 50s, even if this is a specifically German development. Secondly, I discuss the positive model of the military protector, through which the military and police come closer together, a model that responds to new forms of war. And thirdly, I discuss the negative downsides of military service, traumatization, and spiritual injury. And finally, I outline very shortly an interpretation of Romans 13, the most important scriptural passage justifying violence by state authorities. We are all aware that military service has changed profoundly throughout history. From medieval chivalry, mercenaries armies, standing armies of the dukes, to the combination of professional soldiers with general conscriptions in our time, and above all changed with the possibility of nuclear war. Less well known is how pacifistic attitudes also have developed. The first Christians did not have to do military service within the Roman Empire. Of course, Roman soldiers could become Christians, but only few Christians became soldiers. When the state became more and more Christianized after Constantine, the Christians affirmed military service, but not for monks and clerics. The debate revived during the Reformation time. The Catholic Erasmus of Rotterdam committed all Christians to working for peace. In his eyes, wars were a continuation of Jesus' suffering. Only minorities in all churches and denominations advocated pacifism. The first drafts of peace orders emerged during the early Enlightenment. In Protestantism, the Quaker William Penn drafted a European Peace Union in his book, An Essay Towards the Present and the Future Peace of Europe. In Catholicism, Charles Castel de Saint-Pierre followed with his Projet pour rendre la paix perpétuelle en Europe. And Immanuel Kant continued these drafts in his essays on perpetual peace in the end of the 18th century. He expected enduring peace only from republican states at a time when there was still a longing for the great Prince of Peace. But you know, Napoleon disappointed these longings. And after his wars, they founded peace societies in different countries, but very late only in Germany. The two world wars established international organizations to secure peace. First, the Völkerbund, the League of Nations, in 1920 after the First World War, and after the Second World War, the United Nations in 1945. In the meantime, the threat of nuclear war had changed the situation. Due to the danger of nuclear wars, the old interstate wars disappeared. However, hybrid wars, other wars, that is, wars without formal declarations of war, spread more and more in the world. This development changed both the military reality and also the pacifistic movements, and of course influenced the ideas in our book. I give first a short overview of the main thesis of this book. The first part is called Combatants, Ethics and Society, and takes specifically problems in Germany as its starting point. After the crimes of the German army under National Socialism, we discussed here in Germany very controversial rearmament. On the one hand, many accepted in the Cold War the rearmament as securing a democracy in West Germany, especially as contrast to a dictatorship ruling in East Germany. On the other hand, the division of the country was also a motivation for pacifism during the Cold War in West Germany. Both together led to the so-called complementary peace ethics, which affirmed a commitment to peace with and without weapons, Frieden mit und ohne Waffen, and was thus able to avoid a rift and split in West German Protestantism. The second part, on virtues re-evaluating the military context, formulates a positive military ethics that we summarize under the guiding principle, das Leitbild, of the Miles protector, the protecting soldier. The soldier appears here as the protector of life and coexistence. We know generally three possible approaches to ethics. You know the deontological approach by the search for duties, the teleological approach by defining goals, and the ethological approach by reflecting on virtues. Our book prefers the last model based on virtues. And the third part, on moral injury and character, deals with the dark side of the military. The thesis is that these dark sides are not only traumatizing reactions to borderline situations as a challenge for medical and therapeutic help, but are often also independent of such situations as spiritual injuries. The confrontation with the military situation of killing and mortal danger fundamentally questions our relationship to life and to God. Despite all the positive justifications for military action, we must not suppress this dark side. The final contribution in our book is remarkable. It is the only contribution of an American author, and it is the voice of an American peace ethic. Let's now deal with a selection of the main problems discussed in these three parts of the book. I start with some considerations on ethics and society. This is the first part. After the Second World War, the rebuilding of the Federal Armed Force, the Bundeswehr, was highly controversial in West Germany. In Protestantism, the so-called complementary peace ethics emerged under the influence of the physicist and philosopher Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker. It held the view that the simultaneous and complementary existence of an army and a pacifistic movement in the same state could promote and secure peace. The army by sending a message to potential enemies, we defend our freedom. And the pacifist with the message, but we want also peace. Both together, I think, helped to overcome the Cold War. I should add, in my opinion, the complementary principle is more than a compromise solution for the special problem of peace. We work in a complementary work in many areas, for example, in politics by government and opposition, and in our justice system by public prosecutors and defense laws, and so on. When rebuilding our army, we developed in Germany a new military ethics characterized by the principle of inner leadership and the model of the soldier as a citizen in uniform. The key word, inner leadership, is misleading, after my meaning, in that it refers not to an internalization of external orders, but to the internal freedom of the soldier to follow his inner guidance by his own conscience, instead of following only external orders of the army. The officers who attempted an uprising against Hitler on July 20, 1944 are the role models for the inner leadership. Karl Goerdeler and others were executed. I should say his daughter ran here a school at Heidelberg for a long time and was active in the leadership of our university worship. Both the new peace ethic in German Protestantism and pastoral care for soldiers based themselves on the model of the resistance against Hitler. After the end of the Cold War in 1989, a new chapter began for the Bundeswehr. Since 1991, the Bundeswehr, our army, has been deployed more and more abroad to enforce, secure, and maintain peace. They sheltered and complemented in this way development aid. These foreign deployments came close to international police operations. The United Nations initiated some of them, including the failed mission in Afghanistan. The Russian government legitimized even the Ukraine war initially as a limited police operation, but in reality it was an imperialistic and is an imperialistic war. At the same time, however, the war in Israel shattered the peace policy of West-oriented states. The self-image of military chaplaincy is probably more positive than the reality comparable to the same phenomenon in all institutions, including the university. Since we no longer have compulsory military service for all citizens, the Bundeswehr attracts people with an affinity to militaristic mentality, so that not only soldiers, but even pastoral care developed a tendency to turn from an ecclesiola in ecclesia into an ecclesiola extra ecclesiam. Some small structural changes increased this tendency. The leader of the pastoral care within the Bundeswehr in our army was, for example, in the past, at the same time, a leader of one of our churches. Now he is only active within the Bundeswehr. In this way, it is natural that he develops a greater affinity to military institutions and mentalities than to the church and its theology. The second topic in our book are considerations to the moral ethos of our soldiers. Our soldiers and our military chaplaincy could develop a new ethos in the present day, not at least because of the many peacekeeping missions of our army. It is the ethos of the Miles protector, the protecting soldier. But since the Ukraine war, this development could change once again. Of course, wants the soldier to be a protector, but in war, he is also a destroyer, a Miles vastator. It is also his duty to destroy and to kill. Nevertheless, it is good to summarize military ethics by some guiding principles such as the Miles protector. This is probably better than naming duties and goals. Those who define duties also must reflect their violations. And those who define goals must expect that very often soldiers do not achieve the goals of their military operations, no matter how good these goals are, as in the war in Afghanistan. In view of the uncertainties regarding duties and goals, general guiding principles like the Miles protector can better motivate people to be soldiers with a good conscience than duties and goals. Soldiers are supposed to protect civilian life, above all the possibility for the citizens to shape their lives and coexistence in freedom. Nevertheless, there is no doubt that change in military operations has relativized the difference and contrast between military and police operations. One cannot legitimize this development by the fact that the Roman legions once performed also police duties in the Roman Empire. The Romans, they were very intelligent, did not allow their legions of soldiers to enter the city of Rome, except in some special, exceptional situations. Within the city of Rome, the prefect, performed police functions. When Paul wrote in Romans 13 that the state officials must exercise force, he is thinking only, I think, of police force. In Romans 13, he does not name the emperor or an official in the singular, who could be the emperor, but only officials in the plural. In the provinces, however, the legions, the soldiers had also police functions. In any case, today we should make also a clear distinction between the police and the military. The distinction between violence against hostile enemies and violence against deviant citizens is extremely important within a democratic constitutional state. Regarding peacekeeping missions, we must always bear in mind the soldiers deployed in such missions abroad are for the local population always members of a foreign nations. Even if they are welcomed in the beginning, some groups very easily can activate hostility against them. Peacekeeping missions then easily developed into wars. We have experienced this in Afghanistan. These tendencies to approach military and police are due to the fictional presupposition that within the United Nations, all nations form a common international state. However, as a fact, such an international state does not exist. Such an international state would perhaps be a progress, but perhaps not only a progress. Of course, it is desirable that the United Nations increase their power. However, all increase of power increases also the dangers of power and of moral injury, the third topic in our book. The third part of the book rightly deals with the darker side of a soldier's life. It often leaves traumas in its wake. It's rightly pointed out that these are not only traumas of fear, such as after a traffic accident for which one was not to be blamed, but also often feelings of guilt that can arise even without being traumatized by individuals' events in war, simply because one comes to the conclusion that the respective war itself is wrong. In my opinion, the theological message of justification applies here. No human being is without guilt. Even to soldiers we can only say, pecca fortiter. We all are guilty, even if we are no soldiers. We all have probably done too little to diminish the potential causes of war. Therefore, we all need forgiveness, even if it is important to differentiate different contents and degrees of guilt. At the end of our book, there's a plea for peace ethics written by a theologian from the Southern Methodist Church in Texas, the only contribution from America. This peace ethic, based on the characteristic of the early Christian church in the Acts of the Apostle. I would prefer to remind you once again of Paul and his letters to the Romans. Romans 13 is a key text for dealing with state violence. Paul writes, "Let everyone render due obedience to the bearers of state authority. Whoever opposes state authority opposes the order of God, and whoever opposes him will be liable to judgment. For it is not without reason that it bears the sword. It is in the service of God and executes judgment on him who does evil." In his letter to Rome, Paul does not name the emperor as the holder of the highest state authority. Rightly, in Rome, the prefect, and the republican officials were responsible for law and order. Paul speaks, therefore, in the plural of people who have legitimate power to exercise violence. Nevertheless, he speaks in the singular of people who should obey the law or who violate it. This means he is not only thinking of collective enemies. He is certainly not only thinking of single rebels against the state order, but I think, and I'm convinced, he thinks also of emperor like Gaius Caligula, who was killed by the Roman city prefect because he broke the legitimate order of the state. Of course, he is also thinking of single criminals among the people. However, in my opinion, he is also thinking of an emperor whom the prefect killed because he broke the law. According to my view, Paul condemns all violations of the lawful order in Romans 13, including also violations committed by the rulers themselves. Many thanks for listening.